meeting for Tuesday, January 23rd to order. Senator Warren is joining us via WebEx this morning. First item on the agenda is introduction of bills. Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got two RS numbers to enter into the committee today. The first is RS 2354. Deals with working after a retirement, reducing the days that you have to wait before going back to work from the state.
Committee, are there any questions? Any objections? Seeing none, that'll be introduced.
Second one is RS 2353 on behalf of my colleague Pat Petty. It deals with increasing the amount of, well, I'm not sure exactly what it does, so I'm not going to go into details, but it's on our behalf.
I think it increases the reimbursement percentage for
Yes.
those working after retirement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's exactly what happens.
Any questions? Any objection? Okay, that bill will be introduced.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, we have three hearings today. We'll start with Senate Bill 338, so we'll open that hearing. Eileen, you want to give us an overview?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 338 modifies the reporting requirements for group-funded liability and group-funded workers' compensation pools. As you recall, last session we did the bill that wound down those reimbursement funds, and that was the fund that we had with the refund fund. But sadly, this bill is nowhere near as fun as the refund fund. So currently under KSA 12-2620, group-funded liability pools are required to submit annually a certified independent audited financial statement not later than 150 days after the end of the fiscal year. This bill would grant a longer time frame for that report to be submitted, changing it from 150 days to 180 days. So similarly, in Section 2, you'll see KSA 44-584 applying that same change from 150 to 180 days for group-funded worker compensation pools. And then lastly, in Section 3, currently under KSA 44-590, when an individual member of one of those two pools, the workers' compensation when an individual of a workers' compensation pool terminates or has their coverage canceled, under current law, the pool's required to notify the commissioner within 10 days of that member's leaving their roles. And the fund is then required to maintain coverage for 30 days or until the commissioner gives notice to the pool that the canceled or terminating member has procured workers' compensation or workers' liability insurance. So Senate Bill 338, sorry, that's a typo on my brief there. Senate Bill 338 would remove that requirement to notify the commissioner that the member has canceled or terminated their coverage. And then it would require the pool to maintain coverage for 30 days or until after that canceled or terminating member has procured workers' compensation or workers' liability insurance, employer's liability insurance. And with that, I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Eileen. Committee, are there questions? I see none. Thank you very much. We will now turn our attention to the proponents and invite Eric Turk, Director of Government and Public Affairs with the Kansas Insurance Department. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric Turk from the Kansas Insurance Department. Happy to stand in support of Senate Bill 338. As the reviser mentioned, this would extend the financial audit deadline for the pools that they must submit their certified financial audits to the department every 150 days after their fiscal year. With our communication with the pools, they have requested a little bit of an extension. We're happy to grant them that extension. It's totally fine with us. And additionally, when a member elects to leave a group-funded workers' compensation pool, or if they are booted from the pool, we have the notification that the pool must notify us within 10 days. We don't necessarily need that notification. We are already aware of their financial situations and whatnot, so we just seek to eliminate that requirement.
Eric, thank you. Committee, are there questions of Eric? Senator Pittman.
Eric, I was just wondering, 150 to 180 doesn't seem like a lot of time. It seems like a lot to go through to make a 30-day extension on this. Why is it so short, and why the need?
When you speak to the, when you say it's so short, you're talking about just the extension that we're providing. This is, that's what the pools have requested just a little bit more time with their auditors. Apparently their audits of their books sometimes take a little bit more time. Sometimes there is difficulty in finding the appropriate auditor. So we're content with 180 days, and so are the pools.
Committee, additional questions? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Eric, thank you for your presentation. What happens if they go past the 150 days now?
That is a great question. I'm not sure how many situations we have, but I can get you that number of how many times that does happen. I really don't believe it happens very often, but.
And I have no problem. 180 days, half a year is easier to remember. So I just was wondering what the problem is. What happens if somebody goes past? That's what I was wondering.
Sure, and I think the core purpose of the bill is just to make sure that the pools aren't in violation of statute should they go beyond the 150-day threshold.
Okay. Committee, additional questions? I see none. Thank you, Eric. Is there anyone else who would like to testify as a proponent of Senate Bill 338? Are there any opponents to 338? Is there any neutral testimony? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 338. We will now turn to the most riveting bill that we have every single year, and we will open the hearing on Senate Bill 339. And Eileen, would you give us an explanation?
He's a lot taller than me. So thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. You should have made this the first bill that we heard so that I could get the flubberty words and misspeaks out of my testimony. So Senate Bill 339 is our riveting annual date change bill. As you know, annually all insurers are required to file a risk-based capital report with the Commissioner of Insurance and with the NAIC using the current version of risk-based capital instructions. Each year, the NAIC promulgates a new version of the risk-based capital instructions for use. This requires a bill each session for the legislature to authorize that new version of instructions. And merely the bill just changes the effective date of the risk-based capital instructions by advancing the year. Here, the date changes from December 31st of 2022 to December 31st of 2023. And I can stand for questions.
Eileen, thank you. Committee, are there questions? No questions on the get out of town bill. All right. We'll now turn our attention to the proponents. Eric, you're back up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reviser described the bill perfectly. There's not much more I can add. Each year, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners promulgates a new risk-based capital instructions, and so this would simply codify the new version.
Committee, are there questions? Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eric, thank you for your presentation again. The December 31, 22 to December 31, 23, that looks like that's going back a year. Or is that's not a typo, is it, going from 23 to 24?
No, since the risk-based capital instructions, there have not been any promulgated by the NAIC in this year, so it's a reflection of what was adopted last year, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, are there additional questions? I see none. Thank you, Eric. Are there any additional proponents to Senate Bill 339? Anyone wishing to testify in opposition to 339? Any neutral testimony? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 339. We will now turn our attention to Senate Bill 340. Eileen, would you give us a brief overview?
Good morning, committee members of Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Senate Bill 340 amends KSA 2023 SUP-40-2, 125. It removes automobile club from the definition of person for purposes of enforcing violations of insurance law. As you may recall, last year, we dealt with this same statute by amending that definition to include any legal entity under the jurisdiction of the commissioner, making those entities also subject to penalty for violations of insurance law. I believe this bill would be what the department calls a cleanup, not a technical cleanup, but just a cleanup to remove the automobile club term from that definition of person and removing it from the list of entities subject to penalty for violations of insurance law. And I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Eileen. Committee, are there questions? I see none. Thank you. We will now turn our attention to the proponents. Eric, you're back up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Insurance Department is happy to stand in support of Senate Bill 340. This is the Department's general enforcement statute, and in short, the legislature repealed or deregulated automobile clubs in 2021, I believe, via Senate Bill 78, if my memory serves me correctly. It was Senate Bill 78. They no longer fall under our jurisdiction. This has just remained in statute. It's really a cleanup that probably should have happened at the time when that bill was passed.
Committee, are there questions? See none. Eric, did you want to discuss a possible amendment in the future on this bill?
Sure. I will say the impetus behind the bill that Eileen mentioned from the previous year, Senate Bill 15, ultimately passed, becoming enacted via Senate Bill 119. That phrase, "and any other legal entity under the jurisdiction of the commissioner," was inserted, so that way, if there were other entities that did fall under the jurisdiction of the department, we wouldn't have to constantly come back to the statute and add those individually. I think that we would welcome an amendment that would strike everything preceding that line, just so we won't have, the legislature won't have to visit the statute should any entity no longer fall under the department's jurisdiction.
Okay. Eric, we would be pleased to consider that amendment when we work the bill. If you want to work with Eileen and get something drafted, that would be great. Committee, are there any additional questions of Eric? Okay, I see none. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to testify as a proponent? Is there any opposition? Anyone wishing to testify neutral? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 340. Committee, that does complete our work for the day. We will have a hearing tomorrow on Senate Bill 345. I would remind the Vice Chair and the rankings that we do have a Planning Committee meeting today at 1 o'clock if you're able to attend. And if there's nothing else to come before the committee, we are adjourned.